Welcome back to Gruber Motor Company. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Good morning.
And we are here after the Tesla Investor Day presentation. We thought we would cover some of the topics and some takeaways. We were actually live yesterday afternoon and expressing opinions as the session went along. Had a few technical problems, couldn't quite hear, but you know, that's normal with anything new like this. But it dragged on so long, we eventually just said we'll continue in the morning. I think we were here for 2 hours and 50 minutes or something like that, and the whole session lasted how long, Mark?
Oh, the whole session lasted almost 4.5 hours. There was about 3 hours for the main session. They took a short break themselves, and then they had almost an hour and a half worth of Q&A.
Mm-hmm. Overall, my impression about that Investor Day presentation was, as usual, it was very technical, and there weren't a lot of dynamic people up on stage doing cheerleading, but that's not what you expect from a tech company like Tesla. The event was started with Elon Musk and Drew Baglino. Drew, I think, has been there for like 14 years. He's the chief technical officer and a brilliant guy in his own right. And between him and Elon, they spent a lot of time talking about some of the technical issues. Yes, Jesse?
Real quick, before you dive too far into the show, did you already talk about the background picture?
No, yeah, so the background picture, let's do that for a moment here. What you're looking at here is a little lake in Bavaria, just south of where I was born. And there's another lake that's over to the east of that called Kingsley, which actually has an island on it that has a castle, one of King Ludwig's castles. This lake is not that big, but if you can see the horizon there, there's a church on the other side of the lake, and my brother got married there in a traditional Bavarian wedding. Again, it's a beautiful area there. The Alps are to the south of that and west a bit. And again, in summertime, southern Germany is exactly what you used to see in The Sound of Music if you ever watched that movie. So we decided to use that as a backdrop today. So the Investor Day, I found it to be informative. Not a lot of shocking new information was revealed, but mostly what we were expecting. And it looks like we've got a TikTok comment from Mo Grizzly. What other platforms are y'all on? We are on, yeah.
We are, oh, hold on, let me get my.
He's on TikTok, so we're.
Oh, he's on TikTok?
Yeah.
So we are on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. We have a second YouTube channel. We're on LinkedIn, and we're on TikTok and Instagram. All of them are streaming this live, but if you want to see the background image and have the better experience, we recommend either one of our YouTube channels.
You know, we're also going to be on Spotify as well. It's not a live stream, but don't you guys get that uploaded pretty much the same day, Jesse?
Yeah, we usually get that up within a couple of hours, and you can watch the video there too. So we do video, podcast, and or audio only on Spotify.
You know, the 60-plus sessions that we've done so far since summer of last year have always been in the morning at 8:30 Mountain Standard Time. And we were always curious what would happen if we switched out the time a bit. And we were very surprised yesterday that despite the fact we had a lot of dead air because the audio wasn't great, and of course the presentation from Tesla was far more important than our opinions, we had record participation. So thank you for joining us, and it looks like we may have to switch our times around or do a couple of podcasts per day.
And Pete, just to reiterate, because I don't know if they can hear me on TikTok. He's the one that asked it. Can you tell him real quick the platforms again?
All right. You're hoping that I would remember those, and I'm going to give it a shot, all right? So the platforms that we're on, in case you guys didn't hear that: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube Shorts, YouTube Regular, Instagram,
and
then Spotify.
Spotify in the afternoon, yeah.
Okay. Mo Grizzly is going to YouTube, and he'll be able to see the image. Our tradition here is we have a different cool image every single podcast. You know, you have to have a something unique about your podcast, I feel anyway, and that's one of our traditions is to post something cool in the background.
Oh, you make me so jealous with all these images. I grew up in the northwestern U.S. and
Yeah.
I always miss the green. Phoenix is a beautiful area, but it's not very green like that.
And you know, you can ride your bicycle to these places because Europe is small. You know, it's not like
Yeah.
here, urban sprawl. But yeah, there's nothing nicer than a nice summer day, and they have paths through here. There are little woods there, and then when you're hot, you just go and swim, and all well taken care of as well. So it looks like Mark Ashby. I can't read the bottom of it. I can hear your...
He says, Mark Ashby says he can hear us on TikTok.
On TikTok.
So
okay.
good morning, Mark. Glad to have you on. Good name, by the way.
Yeah. So probably should start with some of the takeaways from the announcements that were made yesterday by Tesla. What do you think, Mark?
You know, I think obviously Tesla stock is getting slammed again today. This morning it was down 7%. Investors were looking for one thing, and they did not get what they were looking for. But I think it was a very good presentation overall. And I think it was completely in line with both what the other master plans have had in the past and with what Elon said this master plan was going to contain as far as content.
Mm-hmm. One of the things he said up when he and Drew were up on stage, he talked about demand for Tesla products. And he said the desire for people to own a Tesla is really high, but a limiting factor is their ability to pay for a Tesla. So it's about affordability. And Tesla is very focused on providing more cost-effective vehicles.
You know, there's a lot of ways they're going to go about doing that. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more too. They're going to be lowering their production costs. I think they had said that they're going to try to cut their production costs in half. They did go ahead and announce that new plant that's going to be in Mexico. That's going to be a lower cost facility because they're going to be able to have lower labor costs. And they had some other kind of non-traditional things, such as the heat pump technology that we'll get into a little bit later too.
You know, they also mentioned that they are incorporating now successfully robotics in the production process. The first go around with the Model 3, there was a lot of frustration. They were in production hell, as Elon pointed out. And at one point, they finally came to the conclusion too much robotics is not a good thing. They scaled back. They went back to a lot of human interaction with the production process. But apparently now they finally dialed in the correct amount of robotics in combination with human labor. And that appears to be paying dividends because they threw out some pretty interesting statistics in terms of labor savings, time savings, which will eventually translate into cost reductions for EVs.
By all means, although I have to admit, I think all of us in the room were talking about the image on the video of the robots that were humanoid looking, building robots and saying, this looks way too much like iRobot.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think that was a powerful, intentional image that was put up on screen. Because, you know, images like that create a paradigm shift.
By all means.
So he also mentioned, Elon mentioned, that it's his personal opinion that hydrogen will not be used meaningfully in transport and shouldn't be. He said, if you're going to use a chemical fuel, use methane, not hydrogen. Now, him having said that, remember Toyota, BMW, and Hyundai Motor Group already invested in making hydrogen-powered vehicles, including tractor-trailers. So it'll be interesting to see how this process evolves in the future, which of these two is going to dominate and which one is going to go away eventually.
Definitely, and you know, methane is what we commonly call natural gas here in the United States. That's an interesting take because a lot of the environmentalists say that methane gas, use of natural gas, is one of the leading contributors to global warming right now. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit of a surprising take, although I think what he's talking about possibly is extracting hydrogen from the methane gas, capturing the emissions that extraction process has so that it doesn't warm the atmosphere, and then using the hydrogen gas or the hydrogen fuel at that point. That would be, and as far as I know, is one of the most sustainable ways of producing hydrogen fuel today.
Interesting. Looks like we have a YouTube Shorts question from Palo. He says, hey, I saw a DC to DC converter short. I was a bit confused about it. Could you explain again what is the purpose of the DC to DC converter in general in an electric vehicle? Well, in a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle, you have an engine, of course, you have a lot of belts and pulleys, and they control an alternator which charges the 12-volt battery, which is your starter battery that cranks over the engine. In an electric vehicle, of course, you don't have those belts and pulleys, but you still have a 12-volt battery. The reason for the 12-volt battery is not to crank up the electric vehicle or start anything. It's to handle all of the low voltage devices that are inside the car. Now remember, you've got a number of 12-volt components in an electric vehicle. The audio system, for example. Those are still being made in 12-volt configurations. Headlights, tail lights, solenoids, locks, even the MCU, the main computer inside a Tesla, runs off of lower voltage 12 volts. So you have a number of devices that are using 12 volts. The main battery in an EV is usually 400 volts or even 800 volts in Europe or in some other platforms. It's not a very safe voltage to run around the car. So a mechanic changing a headlight could get electrocuted fundamentally.
Right.
So what they do is the high voltage DC devices in a car are connected with a bright orange cable. That was a standard that was evolved, and there are very few of them. One deviation is the HVAC compressor in an electric vehicle, in a Tesla at least, runs off of the 400 volts. So in order to maintain a 12-volt battery in an electric vehicle, since you don't have an alternator to charge it, they have a DC to DC converter that takes 400 volts or 800 volts DC, converts it down to 12.8 volts, and then keeps that battery charged. So that's the function of a DC to DC converter, and that's consistent with all of the EVs that we're familiar with, all the way from Roadster through all of the Tesla platforms and some of the other manufacturers.
YouTube Shorts, Palo makes a comment. I believe methane is the #1 source of hydrogen fuel. Palo, I think you're right. I haven't done a ton of research on hydrogen fuel and the sources for it, but I know there are many different sources. Methane is probably the #1 source as far as I know. They call that blue hydrogen. There are different colors of hydrogen that have been associated with the different extraction methods. For example, green hydrogen is one type of extraction method. They have blue hydrogen, and they have a few other colors as well.
So a TikTok question from Shane Suzuki. He asks, how long can a Tesla, post-2012, not a Roadster in other words, sit at 0% charge? Months? The simple answer to that is we have a number of Model S's that we purchased in 2017 that were flood damage cars. Mm-hmm. And when we fire those up, the batteries are still good. What happens inside the later model Teslas is there are contactors that actually open up and disable any connection to the battery. In the Roadster, that's not the case. There's still devices that are running, like the thermal management. There's a 12-volt DC cooling pump that runs. And so a battery eventually, at close to zero, will go even below zero, or bricked, as they call it, in a Roadster, which then means that it has to come to a shop like ours to be revived. Or, at Tesla, the battery replaced. So that's the simple answer to that question. There are protection circuits in the later model Teslas that prevent any damage to the battery from being at 0% charge.
Mm-hmm. Now, we had another comment on YouTube. If you guys could scroll that back up to that comment. Yes, Palo again. Pete, you're a technical genius.
Thank you.
Interesting, great answer, he says. Thanks, Pete. On TikTok, Napped Wondering asks, mentions that hydrogen fuel cell rods of latticed micro-PEM, unlike bone marrow, can be run off of blackwater. Thank you for that comment, Napped. I did not know that. I think that's a fascinating thing. Blackwater, of course, is the contaminated or polluted water, typically referring to sewage.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So Tesla also claimed in this investor day that the Model 3 is more efficient than the Toyota Corolla. In fact, they say that it's a small car and it's 4 times more efficient from oil well to wheel than Toyota's small car. I found that to be an interesting statistic.
Drew Blandino gave what I thought was one of the best object lessons of the day yesterday. He said, imagine yourself taking and putting a pot of water on the stove. The energy it takes to heat that pot of water and then put a pound of pasta into that pot of water, and then the energy it takes to heat that pound of pasta or cook that pound of pasta. The energy to heat the pot of water is the energy that a Model 3 takes to travel a mile. The energy to cook the pasta until it's done is the energy that it takes a Model 3 to go another mile. So you're talking about propelling a 4,000-pound car 2 miles on the energy it takes to heat up water and cook a pound of pasta.
To boil some noodles.
Yeah, to boil some
that
noodles.
That was a great analogy. And that was Drew that came up with that, right?
Yeah, that was Drew that came up with that.
So, looks like the Cybertruck is coming this year. And although the final date has not yet been released and it was pushed back several times, the company officials confirmed their plans to bring the car to market by 2023. So maybe we'll see some releases this year. I know they talked about a production ramp in the final 2 quarters of this year, but it'd be nice to actually put some in the hands of owners.
Pete, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Well, they talked yesterday a lot about vertical integration, running businesses for 40 plus years. What do you think about that? How Tesla is now housing everything within the same buildings and getting all their processes done there in-house. Do you think that's going to improve things like they're preaching it?
Well, the example they gave was the supply chain chip shortage. And, you know, with when you build things yourself, you have a large measure of control and you're not at the mercy of markets, although raw materials could be a problem. But yeah, it seems to be a solid direction from where I'm sitting. What do you think?
You know, I think if you look back about 100 to 150 years, in the times of the robber barons and Antitrust Act and the trusts that were set up, the way that they worked was through vertical integration. Rockefeller owned the railroads. He bought the mines, basically told the miners that they couldn't get transport of their ore to market, but he bought the mines at a discount price. You ended up with the most efficient, cheapest way to get product to market because of the vertical integration that they had. Right. They went in about it in a way that put themselves up as kind of a ruling class, and so that ended up causing the U.S. government to step in and pass some laws. But the basic concept of vertical integration is not a new concept. It's at least 150 years old. It goes all the way back to the start of the Industrial Revolution, and it's incredibly effective. Mm-hmm. I was not surprised, therefore, to hear Tesla in their Q&A talk about actually doing lithium refining as well.
Outstanding. You know, what brought the regulators in with, like you mentioned, John D. Rockefeller, was a practice of going into a particular territory and undercutting the pricing, even selling below cost to squeeze out the competition, and eventually they owned that market and then restore the price. And that had the regulators fuming, and of course that's why a lot of this antitrust legislation hit the books.
Yes, absolutely. On Instagram, Mohammed Hassan 2377 says, I live in Maine every year. My 2013 Tesla needs a battery heater.
You know, we don't see that here at our service center, fundamentally because the heater doesn't get used as much. But in Maine, I would understand that you're putting it through, double duty or triple duty. One of the things that I found interesting in the one of the takeaways from the presentation yesterday was the discussion about that 12-volt batteries are improving in the Teslas. They used to use absorbent glass mat type batteries, which is basically a lead acid battery. similar to a gel cell where there's not sulfuric acid sloshing around, and it is maintenance free, but it still has sulfuric acid and lead plates. And the life projection that they had posted up on the screen for that old style 12-volt lead acid battery in a Tesla was 4 years. And I kind of chuckled when I saw that, because here in Arizona, they won't even last 2 years. And the fundamental reason is it gets extremely hot here. But the good news is that they had improved the design by going to finally a 12-volt lithium-ion battery. And you know, people always wondered, you have a lithium-ion Maine battery pack, which has 7,000 cells in it, 400 volts, you know, hundreds of amps. Why not do the same thing with that 12-volt battery that we can't seem to get much lifespan out of, and get rid of that old technology? Well, they've done that. But more interestingly, they are now moving into the higher low voltage DC technology with 48 volts in the Cybertruck. And what a 48 volt battery will do, and we're hoping that this is a lithium ion battery. I don't think either I didn't hear or they didn't say, but we're going to assume that it's a 48 volt lithium ion battery. It's going to limit your ability to put accessories into the car because you won't have a 12 volt system available. So if you're used to swapping out your own stereo, for example, which I guess you wouldn't do in a Model S because, or the later platforms,
True.
because the computer actually brings in your audio.
True, but swapping out headlights or
Yeah.
you know, other lights or other things, accessories inside the car would still be something that people would do.
Yeah, but of course the market will respond as soon as they're making 48 volt, low voltage 48 volt cars. There will be a bunch of vendors jumping on the bandwagon to create accessories at that voltage.
Oh, absolutely. You know, with my background in information technology, 48 volts is not anything new. Power over Ethernet, or PoE, is a very common technology. It all runs at 48 volts. They run on these little tiny 24 to as small as 30 gauge copper wires. And you're able to power telephones, you're able to power security cameras, they're able to send as much as 30 watts across what otherwise is a network cable that runs data, not electricity.
Sure.
So the 48 volts is not a new concept. They're not having to build the wheel all over again. They're able to really leverage what's been out there in the technology industry already. So I think it's going to be a fairly easy transition, or easier than a lot of people believe it's going to be.
You know, it goes back even further than that. Central offices, telephone, even 100 years ago, all operated on 48 volts. And that's how they provided backup. They would have massive wet cell rooms at 48 volts, and that's what provided the voltage for your dial phones that you guys used to use in your homes. The deviation was the ring voltage would be higher, but your normal, you know, operating voltage for dial phones for 100 years now was always 48 volts. So you're right, it's not new.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point too. That's, you know, 50 years ago you pick up your phone because the power's out and you still have a dial tone.
Right. So what's the advantage? Why go to 48 volts? Well, there are a number of advantages. One of them is voltage and current are inversely proportional. So when you double the voltage, you cut your current in half. Current is what determines the thickness of your wire to transmit a given amount of energy. So you've reduced your wire sizes to about 25% of what it would need to be with a 12-volt battery. Fuses are smaller. You have less amperage running through. And, you know, so there are some distinct advantages.
Yeah, they even talked about being able to make simpler car harnesses as a result of going to 48 volts. Looks like we have several questions that have come in. Starting from TikTok, LPA687. Talk about a car like the Prius Prime, which has an EV mode that'll go about 25 miles on the battery. This kind of config seems to me to be a game changer in the short run instead of no EV mode.
The Prius that I'm aware of, or familiar with, let me put it that way, was around the year 2000 when my wife and I owned a couple of them actually. And you could go maybe a mile, below 30 miles or so on electric power, which is really what whet my appetite before getting into
Sure.
battery electric vehicles. What came next was a Tesla Roadster, and then I realized that the performance of an EV could exceed that of the other cars that I had. And I was into muscle cars. I had an ACR Viper. I had a Ferrari, you know. But the instant torque was pretty impressive. The problem that I have personally with hybrids is we're not really solving the problem. Yes, we're getting better gas mileage, but the whole point is to get us away from fossil fuels and to stop warming the planet and reduce the amount of carbon that we're throwing in the air. And you have twice the maintenance. You now have an EV drivetrain and an ICE drivetrain, and both of those need to be serviced.
Yeah, I've seen, I have two relatives that both have plug-in electric hybrids. A Ford C-Max Energy that has just about exactly that, around 20 miles of pure electric on an electric battery, and a newer hybrid Prius. I think it's a 2016. I tend to agree with you though. Your combustion engine is going to be anywhere from 20, 21 up to at best about 30% efficient. The power, just today, your coal-fired or your natural gas-fired power plant is typically between 40 and 50% efficient on its use of energy. Just that efficiency factor by itself makes electric inherently a cleaner technology than fossil fuels.
Interesting. And you know, the advantage of a hybrid or an ICE vehicle is the ability to take long trips without the wait times for charging. But as battery technology improves, and if you look at the last 10 years, charging rates have increased and charging times have reduced. We're headed toward a crossover point where eventually there will be little difference in terms of time spent between ICE vehicles and electric vehicles, especially with cars like Aptera, which are actually scavenging energy from the sun and able to go 40 miles without needing to plug in or charge.
You know, and if Tesla is able to achieve even part of the vision that they mentioned in Master Plan 3 about charging stations and charge ports, they talked at some length about being able to have people do more charging during the day when renewable energy can be used to provide the electricity for that charging. And as such, we're talking about putting in a lot more of the destination charging infrastructure. So you be able to go, drive to work, park your car at work, leave it there for 4, 6, 8 hours. You know, maybe you're having lunch and you're there for 4 hours, and when you get to work, you plug in, you charge. When you leave for lunch, your car is fully charged again. It's been charged using green energy because it's charging during the day.
Right. So it looks like we got a bunch of questions to get through. Let me just clear a few of them. TikTok, Shane Suzuki, he says, thanks, make me feel better in response to the Model S answer earlier. TikTok, Paul, welcome. He says, hello. YouTube Shorts, pay low. Thank you both. These streams are the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Instagram, Mohammed Hassan 2377.
We've talked about the battery heater with him.
Right, the battery heater. TikTok, Smuggler's back. Good morning.
Good morning, Smuggler. Good to see you this morning.
And thanks for hanging in there with us yesterday for about 3 hours or so. Facebook, Jiminy Stack, local EV pro expert. The 12 volt, he says, also does the pre-checks before the main high voltage gets connected. Correct.
Good point. Good point.
So they're going to have to change that over to 48 volts. TikTok, BioClean Eagle Pass, Texas. Why the sunglasses? Hard to take you seriously. Well, maybe you shouldn't take us seriously. Maybe we're making all this up. Maybe this is, maybe we're artificial intelligence. Maybe we're robots.
Well, and maybe Smuggler is right. He says to BioClean Eagle Pass, Texas, it's because they are part of the Matrix.
Right. Actually, Smuggler came up with another good reason. During the dry parts of that presentation yesterday, I admit freely, I began to doze off, and my glasses hid that completely from view. So there was another good reason to have sunglasses.
Yes, Smuggler, if we ever decide that we're going to try to fall asleep on camera, you're right, the sunglasses will hide that. Smuggler also says, not to mention, it's harder to jump the low voltage battery to power the computer to access the car when talking about low voltage versus high voltage.
YouTube Shorts, Paylow. How come Tesla doesn't hire all of you and people complaining about service? Hang on a second, it jumped on me there. How come Tesla doesn't hire all of you and put mechanics in Tesla stores? I have heard people complain about service from Tesla itself, but it looks like you have the service side down. Well, they talked about that yesterday, actually, during this investor day. And the statistics that they're collecting indicate that service is improving. And there are, no one's going to pretend that Tesla doesn't have service problems. But you know what? Any of the manufacturers coming online that are getting overwhelmed at the service centers are going to have service problems, and your service experience may not be identical to what you're used to in mature service dealerships where they've had decades to perfect the service flows and they have lots of them. This is a new disruptive technology, and as we predicted, the designs coming from these new manufacturers are not going to be rock solid day one. They're going to be a lot of warranty visits to the service centers, and those tend to clog up the service centers for the traditional work that needs to be done, the unexpected work, not the warranty type work or the things that are design issues that need to be resolved.
It's kind of a catch-22 there. You try to hire enough mechanics to service the vehicles, but like learning a language, if you train somebody and then they don't use their training, they lose it.
Yeah.
And then the vehicles start pouring in, and you have guys that you tried to train, but they really kind of lost some of their stuff and some of their knowledge. And now the cars are coming in and it takes them longer. And so eventually the service comes online. We're seeing that with the other more traditional car makers that are trying to transition to EV as well. They're having some of the same issues on their service centers. It's just not as pronounced because the electric vehicle is a much smaller part of their overall service offering.
Some of the biggest service complaints with Tesla have to do with their first early adopters with the Roadsters. And the expectation is that service will always remain at a certain level. Well, that's just not reasonable to expect. The primary reason is, in the service business, a portion of it is classroom learning. The other portion is OJT, on-the-job training. And the Tesla service centers don't see enough Roadsters anymore to really get the OJT necessary to generate competent people on working on Roadsters. So the fix that Tesla has put in place, and it's frustrating for owners, they have begun to regionalize Roadster repair. So if you had 4 service centers in the state of Arizona at one point, only one of those now will be eligible to accept your Roadster. And instead of driving 15 miles away, you may have to drive 60 miles or hundreds of miles away to get your Roadster serviced. But there really isn't a good solution to that because, again, they are focused on the products that are high volume coming through their service centers. And without that OJT, with occasional cars showing up, you're not going to have a high level of expertise unless you regionalize, which is what they've been doing. They did mention in the Investor Day presentation yesterday, there has been an 11% drop in the time it takes to service a vehicle and a 16% decrease in early service in the last half of the year. It also now takes 9% less time to get a service appointment. So some statistics, at least regarding service, look like they are improving.
Halo on YouTube Shorts has another comment for us, mentioning and possibly asking, Cybertruck is going to come with Ethernet ports and internet. Now, I had not heard that myself, but I would not be at all surprised if it came at least with Ethernet ports. Most people don't know that the Model S has Ethernet ports to plug into its CAN bus. That's how mechanics do a lot of their diagnostic work.
Now, does this mean that we can get rid of our Cox and Quest connection and simply use the
really
Cybertruck
wonder.
for our connectivity?
Bill Wood on TikTok mentioned something like that. I think Bill Wood, you've given me one of my favorite comments in a long time. He knows how to use the phone jacks in the house. I made a 48-volt LED lamp. I plugged it into my phone jack. It works, And it's free.
And it's free, that's right. And the LED draws virtually no current, so you're not really affecting performance.
That's right. Randall Scott 50 on TikTok asks, how can storage solve power problems?
Well, things like brownouts, for example. And if we're talking about home storage, having stationary storage systems in your home, you're no longer at the mercy of utility issues. Some guy hit a telephone pole and knocked out the grid for that neighborhood, or storms, or other grid outages. What's going to be interesting in my mind is whether eventually people will be able to sell power and get rid of this monopoly that utilities currently hold, which is, despite the fact that you have a solar system on your home and you're generating way more power than you need, you can't run an extension cord over to your neighbor and sell him some power for his freezer or whatever,
Absolutely. I happen to have solar on my house, and the way that storage could help solve power problems, just for my little microcosm, a very micro system, during the middle of the day, my house produces about 8 kilowatts of power. In the summertime, I can go as high as 10 kilowatts of power per hour. I cannot use 10 kilowatts of power per hour if I'm at work and my wife is at work.
Right.
At 6 o'clock in the evening, the sun is low on the horizon. My home is only producing about 2 kilowatts per hour of power. Well, now I have air conditioning running. I'm home. We're cooking dinner. We're potentially plugging in our car to charge. We're using 8 to 10 kilowatts per hour of power, but we're only producing 2. A storage solution effectively shifts that power that's generated in the afternoon to be available to us in the evening. Tesla talked about that at some length in their investor day, talking about all of the extra storage that was going to be needed to help solve and make power sustainable. On a macro level, I think that's what they were talking about.
Interesting. So it sounds like you don't have power walls at your house.
I do not have a power wall or anything like that at my house yet.
Okay, that would be a storage system. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Instagram, Oakshade104 asks, what about a swap out battery pack? Common size, just stop and swap for unlimited miles. NIO is doing that. There's a good video that Kyle Connor put out. He was in Norway, and he drove a Polestar, I believe, to one of these battery swap out stations. It looked like it was clunky. It looked like it was very expensive. And especially in a country that has 4 seasons, there was ice and snow outside. But the most interesting thing to me was it took about 15-20 minutes for this swap, when you could have just simply used the charging systems that were adjacent to this battery swap station and gotten a charge with about the same amount of time. Now, of course, if there was a waiting line, then the swapping station would have been quicker. But looking at it from an engineering standpoint, the logistics of taking a 1,000-pound battery pack and unplugging it from a car, having connector alignment issues and weather conditions and weight issues, and then storage issues and the hydraulics necessary to move these packs around after you've dropped them, it just seems like an engineering nightmare to me.
On TikTok, Johnny J868 says, this is awesome. Johnny, thank you so much. It's a pleasure for us to be able to interact with you today. And Randall Scott on TikTok says that you propose eliminating 90% of portable power. Thoughts on that one?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what he means by that.
Not either. Smuggler then comes to us with a question on TikTok. Sorry, I missed the first part of this podcast this morning. Did they mention anything about the Model 2? Actually, Smuggler, there was a lot mentioned in the investor day. The Model 2 was not one of the things mentioned. That's from the press today. That's one of the things that they believe is causing the stock to drop, actually, is because there was no specific mention of any new models, although there was specific mention of a new factory being built in Mexico.
In Monterrey, Mexico, yeah. There were there were some statistics as well. Tom Zhu, who gave a presentation, I think he was production I could be wrong on this, but anyway, he says it took 12 years, it took Tesla 12 years to build the first 1 million cars, 18 months to reach 2 million, 11 months to reach 3 million, and less than 7 months to reach today's milestone, which is 4 million cars produced. The eventual goal is for Tesla, by the end of this decade, to reach 5 million cars per year production. And in order to do that, there was some discussion about the amount of production capacity necessary to do that. And we're talking about more gigafactories. Yeah, Mexico was mentioned, expansions in China, Shanghai. There's even been talk about some expansion into Canada. And you had mentioned an interesting thing about the Made in America Act. Maybe you can talk about that a bit.
Oh, by all means. I think that Tesla is very serious about cutting costs, and I think it's going to lead toward a new, lower cost model of vehicle. I think the decision to go to Mexico as opposed to going elsewhere in the world, very intentional though. The new Inflation Reduction Act 2.0 that extends the EV credits is very specific on the requirements that it has for cars and the percentage of manufacturing that has to be done in America. Well, America, in this case, really means North America, not the United States of America. So Canada, USA, or Mexico, all are areas that qualify a manufacturer to be able to have a Made in America stamp on their car, and for them to have the level of production and assembly that's required to meet the standards to get the EV discounts from the federal government.
TikTok, Brad C. asks, do you work alongside Tesla for the capability to work on Tesla EVs or reverse engineer? Our relationship with Tesla continues to evolve. And initially in 2014, they were confused by our success with the Tesla Roadster, not realizing that we've been reverse engineering critical power equipment for 35 years at that time. And it was a standard practice. You got no cooperation from the manufacturers. So if you were trying to repair their equipment, you really had to develop your own schematics, drawings, test points, and reverse engineer everything, and repair down to component level. So we were used to this. And when I got my Tesla Roadster, we finally figured out we've been in the Tesla repair business all along, because what's in a EV is the same thing that's in an uninterruptible power system in a data center. You have a three-phase inverter, you have a battery or a DC plant, and what it powers is different. A bunch of servers or computers versus the drive motor or drivetrain in a car. So somewhere along the way, Tesla began to reach out to us. We began to sell them parts. We began to support them with technical advice, especially aging issues when it comes to their first generation cars, the Tesla Roadsters, because we get a unique perspective. Unlike the service centers that people took Roadsters to, who would module swap, we were actually repairing down to the module or the component level inside the modules, because we don't have a parts room like Tesla has at the service centers to draw modules from. And that gave us an interesting glimpse into engineering problems, aging component failures, deferred maintenance. And we were able to predict for Tesla what the Roadster migration through time would be like. And today, we have a highly collaborative relationship with Tesla. And we work on a number of aging issues with the Roadster. So we do work alongside with Tesla. They have not mentioned us at the Investor Day yet, no. But I can foresee the day when they say, you know, there's this little company called Gruber Motor Company that has been helping us a bit here. They did it with AC Propulsion, which actually developed the T0, and they give them a lot of credit for having started Tesla fundamentally.
Absolutely. Smuggler on TikTok also talks to us saying that here in South Carolina, the power companies buy excess solar, but at a much reduced rate from your home. Smuggler, here in Arizona, it's the same thing. Power companies were able to successfully lobby the state to allow them to buy our solar at wholesale prices. So
not retail, wholesale prices.
So they'll charge you 25 cents, but they'll only pay you 3 cents.
And your neighbor would probably pay you retail, and that's the rub.
Absolutely. So my next door neighbor gets my solar that's extra and I don't get the benefit of a retail price on that.
Right. The
It's-
utility grabs all the margin, and
That's right. They're grabbing that 9 cents to as much as 20 cents per kilowatt hour, and all they're doing is sending it 30 feet to the next door neighbor.
Yep. LinkedIn, Robert Arnoff. What is the timing on the new Roadster? You know, my simple comment to that is, yesterday they were late to the investor day. The whole world was watching. What was it, 10, 15 minutes late, all right? It's in their DNA. You could call it overcommitting, under-delivering. The good news is they always deliver. It may not be on the exact timeline that you're expecting or that they initially committed to, but it is coming. I happen to know that there are people within Tesla that have been working on this project, so it's not dead by any stretch. And if you look at Tesla's history, nothing has ever not come to fruition, what they've announced at least.
Yeah, and what they haven't announced to us, unfortunately, is when it's coming. So we really don't know ourselves exactly when it's going to be coming. Brad C. from TikTok says, wow, very impressive. Thanks for answering.
YouTube Shorts, Paylo says, impressive work. How can the average person like me learn about Tesla repairs? You know, it's on-the-job training, guys. It's trial and error. It's digging in and reverse engineering. It's experimentation. And it's not for the faint of heart. It's extremely expensive, and you eventually gain expertise. For anyone wanting to get into the EV business, I would say stay away from the traditional mechanic schools. They're going to teach you skills that are going to make you popular during the dinosaur era. In order to work on electric vehicles, you really need to have a strong electronics background and software background. And that is much more important than low-tech auto. So that's my advice.
You know, I completely and wholeheartedly agree with you. It's easier to find an electronics engineer who is mechanically inclined than it is to find a mechanic who has an electrical engineering background.
You summarize it perfectly. TikTok Smuggler asks, speaking of aging components, are you seeing any Model S that need board level parts replaced? Yes, all the time. When the batteries go bad, for example, the large 1,200-pound battery in a Model S, the fix at Tesla is a $22,000 pack replacement. That gets you a brand new battery and they send you on your way. Problem is, with a 2012, 2013 Model S, it may be worth $30,000, $35,000. That's a disproportionate cost for repair. So companies like us are able to go into the battery pack and do repairs. One level repair is finding a resistive cell, and it only takes one in that car to kill the car. But we also have to repair oftentimes the battery management boards, which is a little microprocessor-based board that sits on every module, and there's 16 of them in a P85, for example, or in an 85 kW pack. And these components get replaced, repaired, and then that battery is good again.
Yeah, another area in the Model S that we've seen a lot of repairs is in the MCU itself. They even spoke a little bit about that, the media control unit, in the Investor Day. But we've seen, especially on the older, the 2012, 2013, 2014 Tesla Model S's, that board repairs inside the MCU have become necessary.
Smuggler asks, I mean like caps in that. Capacitors, okay, good question. The inverter in a Model S has substantially improved from the Tesla Roadster inverter, which had 21 electrolytic capacitors in it. We're talking about large ones, 400 microfarad at 475 volts. Capacitors have an 8-year shelf life. In the critical power world, they proactively replace them every 8 years, knowing that as they get old, they dry up, they become resistive, and eventually it's going to blow your inverter because they're high voltages with high amperages floating around in there. In the Tesla Model S inverter, they went to a much more elegant design. In fact, it's about 1/3 the size of the Tesla Roadster inverter, but it puts out over twice the horsepower or power.
Okay.
The capacitor banks in this 3-phase inverter in a Model S is actually a large assembly. And again, it will need to be replaced, But 8 to 10 years at this point is about the amount of time that a Tesla Model S has been out, and we're not seeing any failures yet with those. But that will eventually be a common replacement item, will be the cap banks in a Tesla Model S inverter.
Holden Davidson from TikTok asks us, why are supercapacitors not being used in EVs to increase both the charge speed and the performance?
Well, production capacity and a design. They are not readily available yet for commercial use, although it's a much better technology, and there are many companies working on solving that problem. It will eventually hit the cars.
Do you think that supercapacitors would eventually work in tandem with things like your solid-state battery technologies, graphene batteries, things of that sort, or would they even be able to?
Yeah, very much so. It's actually part of the that technology.
Okay.
Supercapacitor, I think, is a broad term for those types of batteries.
Okay. Palo on YouTube Shorts finally asks, do you like the Cybertruck design? He says he personally loves it, but has heard mixed reviews from friends.
Well, when I first saw it, and Franz was up on stage, and they were announcing it. Now, I think it was Elon that was first. Franz came with a sledgehammer and broke the window. All right.
Yes, yes.
I looked at it and I thought, okay, Tesla's having a bit of fun with us. There's another truck somewhere that's going to roll out here shortly, but they're showing us this futuristic thing because they wanted to tease us a bit. Then I realized, no, this is it. And then I observed for a few days, and I began to realize that this was a highly successful design. It was regarded that in the press. My vision of a pickup truck owner was fundamentally a redneck in South Carolina that wanted to go hunting, right? Mm-hmm. And it just wasn't the same image. Do you see him rolling up to the bar on a Friday night with his cowboy hat and a Cybertruck? I couldn't see it. But it turns out there were enough hipsters and people, urban people, that wanted this truck that the pre-orders just came pouring in. I think at this point we've got 1.6 million pre-orders for the Cybertruck. And guess what? The guys with the cowboy hats are loving this truck too. So I've been wrong before, That's my take on this.
I think it's a very distinctive and unique design. I'm looking forward to seeing it live. It's so hard to really form an opinion of something until you've seen it. On the Rivian, I look at it and I'm like, okay, kind of a box truck. Even the pickup is kind of boxy. We've seen a few of them now here live in Phoenix. It's a beautiful vehicle. Mm-hmm. I think the Cybertruck is going to be kind of the same way. I'm going to reserve my opinion until I really see one live.
Looks like YouTube Shorts. Palo has an opinion on a Cybertruck as well. He says, I think the Cybertruck will be great for construction. You won't mind the dents, and if you're installing solar, you will have another power source ready.
That's very true, and with some of the things that they're doing, even filing for patents, I believe, for some of the alloys that they're going to put in the Cybertruck, it may be even hard to dent the silly thing.
All right, guys, just so you know, we're coming up on 58 minutes.
58 minutes, okay. All right. Well, we've got some news items. Do you have anything else that you wanted to run through?
Yeah, there's one of the two things that I wanted to mention that haven't been said a lot in the press. First one's very simple. Tesla has officially opened their supercharger network. I as both a Tesla and non-Tesla owner, am pretty excited about that, actually. I was a little disappointed to find out opening up the supercharger network meant 10 total charging stations located in either New York or California. I'm looking forward to seeing more. The other thing that hasn't gotten a lot of press that I was very impressed with myself is Tesla's commitment to heat pumps and heat pump technology as a means to expand sustainable energy throughout the earth. The heat pump is an exchange unit, for lack of a better way of saying it. It exchanges heat for cool. Either it's taking heat out of your home and putting it out into the atmosphere, or it's taking heat from the outside atmosphere and putting it into your home. With recent technology advances in the heat pump technologies, they're starting to be used elsewhere as well. The Model Y now comes with a heat pump to help warm the battery. The Model 3, likewise, is going to be starting to come out with heat pumps in some of their new designs, because the heat pump is so much more efficient in the way that it can either bring heat into one area or into or reverse its flow of air and bring cooling into an area. So for the hot climates, the heat pump will actually act as a cooling system to help keep batteries cool, in addition to the liquid cooling that takes place. All of this takes place at an efficiency level that other technologies simply don't have. Your gas furnaces cannot heat a home as efficiently as a heat pump can heat a home. The same type of thing is happening in cars. That is a very overlooked part in the press of what happened on the Investor Day, and yet I think that's going to end up being one of the biggest areas of change that Tesla is talking about, their commitment to the heat pump technology.
You know, what I was impressed with during the Investor Day yesterday as well was the tenure of the people that were up on stage and the skill level. We're talking about seasoned veterans, 12, 14 years, Lars, Drew, Rashawn. That speaks to the passion and commitment that these people have for the overall cause, which is renewable energy sources and transportation. But the other thing that I found fascinating is great companies are good team builders. They attract top-notch talent. And every one of those presentations up on that stage were very impressive in terms of their depth of knowledge, their grasp of the overall issues, and the results that they were getting by putting their skills to work. So again, that was one of the main takeaways for me. Was it was a very impressive presentation, and why the market didn't react favorably, they probably didn't get it.
I think so. The investor market is looking for the kind of the dollars and cents, the traditional vision of, hey, here's where we're going and here's how we're going to rule the world. That wasn't what Elon announced. That isn't what any of the other master plans have ever been. I'm not surprised that this one was light on those kind of details. They're casting a vision for the future, not so much saying, here's how we're going to dollars and cents try to rule the world.
Right. Hey guys, can you bring up that graph that I put out there? Sandy Munro, by the way, and some other influencers were at a Clive's bar in Texas and did a post, event analysis. And I watched Sandy up on stage, and his primary comment was, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm twice as old as any of you on this stage, and I'm going to tell you that Tesla's going to crush the competition. There's nobody that even comes close. And Sandy's been in this world for many, many decades, so he has some credibility with a statement like that.
It's not necessarily wrong. It's pretty bold to say it that way, but I mean, Tesla's very, very, very far ahead.
Well, that graph that we just popped up there, this is the production of electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid PHEVs. And as you can see, there's some top name brands, but they're down at the bottom there. Stellantis, which assimilated a number of car companies, 52,000, 54,000 for Toyota. Ford, top brands down here. And look at Tesla dominate with 339,000. And that was in 2021, by the way. Production of EVs and PHEVs for the 2021 model year. Will that momentum change or stop? Not with what I saw last night. Look at the production plans. Do any of these other manufacturers have aggressive build plans like Tesla? I think that would be a great graph or a great research project.
Well, I mean, does Ford or Stellantis or Toyota have the nation's largest charging network that can funnel all kinds of money and profits into the company in addition to the electric vehicles?
Sure.
Of course not. And yet Tesla is so many years ahead. They got time to work out all the kinks in their charging network, or a majority of them, while Blink and EVgo and ChargePoint are still struggling to get their charging networks up to anything even approaching the level of what Tesla has. Tesla's now going to open their charging network to all of the cars. How many of these other charging networks are they going to potentially put out of business once they have their charging network completely up and running?
And while Tesla was starting in their formative years, the vision was always the same. They were going to make this happen, while the other guys were saying, "Oh, there's no future in electric vehicles." You know, let's stay with that, with the other products that we're used to making. So Instagram, Ali Akbari 10. Do you guys think that hydrogen fuel cells is the future? My personal opinion is no, but some companies are going to try and most likely fail and eventually realize that the cost savings are in electric vehicles, and that's where they need to focus. It looks like Bethany D from Hot Rods by Dean is joining us on TikTok. Hello, good morning. By the way, the guys that normally come visit you, the Old Timers Club, by the way, Hot Rods by Dean is a company that's just across the street from us that takes cars from the last century and just creates over-the-top renditions of those. New crate engines, paint jobs, killer paint jobs, and restore those vehicles to, 10-point perfection.
Oh, their cars are pieces of art.
Very much so. And yeah, Bethany, stop by the shop sometime, and thank you for joining us on TikTok.
Very much. Bill Wood on TikTok says stainless steel stuff to take care of. He says, I had a DeLorean and he hated the stainless.
That was my reaction as well. The people that owned DeLoreans were not too pleased with the upkeep of, in fact, they used to use steel wool or Brillo pads to get a finish on them before the car shows. I remember guys even at the car shows running those things up and down their fenders to make a shine or make some sort of a texture on it.
And with the, seeing the stainless appliances nowadays and how hard some of those were to take care of, I just shake my head. Yeah.
Okay, guys, I got one thing I wanted to bring up from yesterday. Let me pull myself up here. So I'm going to pull up a video, guys, for you here in just a second, a clip of Elon talking about the robots, the Tesla bots. He kind of went on a little tangent about that. So I'm going to pull up a video here, and I wanted to get your opinion on what you thought when Elon basically had mentioned yesterday that he thinks that the cars part of Tesla is actually going to be the lower part of their revenue in the near future because of these robots.
Amazing.
So hold on 1 second.
He was also talking about a human to robot ratio of being 1-to-1 at some point in time.
Yes.
Every home is going to have one. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's pull this
While
up
we're
here.
waiting for the video to come up, there's the video right now.
This is just showing some of the robot stuff. There's nothing. It's not no sound or anything. But that's what the next thing I was going to mention is he said almost 1-to-1 or more, where essentially we'll have a society where the economy. He basically was asking, what is an economy when you don't have people that have to work? You have everything done by automation, and he really genuinely believes that between the AI and the Tesla bot, the vehicle manufacturing is going to be one of the smaller parts of the company.
Yeah.
That particular video was, it's revolutionary. It's a little bit disturbing seeing the family picture of the robots there. Mm-hmm. That was a very fascinating part of the presentation. And I think Tesla is going to end up becoming much more than a car company.
And it was intended to shift our thinking, and it was successful.
It sounds like at some point we need to give Bethany a ride. TikTok, Bethany D says that she's going to have to stop by the shop. Please do. Would love to get a ride in a Tesla. Has never been in one.
Absolutely, yes. Anytime. We give tours every day, by the way. Have one coming today. The folks that normally visit their shop, I think 20 of them or so, are coming by to see what the future of cars is.
Oh, really?
Yeah. These are the guys that have commissioned Hot Rods by Dean to convert some of their 60s muscle cars into over-the-top cars, and they're going to see what the new age of transport is. And you know, the other interesting thing about this is Hot Rods by Dean does not yet do any electrifying of those vehicles, but we know that that's going to be a huge business. You can keep the look and feel of that original car. In fact, we have a 71 CUDA that is ready for an engine transplant.
Oh, really?
And I've been seriously thinking about that should be an EV conversion. The 71 CUDA, by the way, was one of the most popular Barracudas made by Plymouth. Mm-hmm. It has the fish grill in the front, and it's a small B-body car, and it lends itself perfectly to a conversion like this. We have YouTube Palo. I think we have not discovered a good way to harvest hydrogen. It is the most abundant element in the universe, though. I believe there will be a clean way to harvest it, and it will be good competition.
That is definitely a possibility, Palo. I think that storage of hydrogen is just as much a challenge as harvesting of hydrogen, though, because of how small the hydrogen atom is. It's the smallest of all atoms. And there's a huge tendency for hydrogen to leak through things. That's why you see so many rocket launches get scrubbed, because they oftentimes use a hydrogen fuel mixture. And Palo, we do agree, those bots are kind of scary, just a little bit.
You know what's fascinating about Tesla is there are other companies that have been building robots for a couple of decades, like Boston Dynamics, for example. But check out Tesla. You know, within the span of a couple of years, they're making the headlines with bots. They just are able to take a concept and bring it to fruition much faster than the other guys. Now, part of it may be funding, granted. You know, Tesla has some pretty deep pockets.
Sure.
So I don't want to downplay Boston Dynamics' contribution to this industry. And I'm sure that Tesla is using some of their technology, or maybe even collaborating with them. But again, at the end of the day, it's who's bringing product to market that's important.
By all means. You know, before we go, I do want to mention too, for everybody out there, please see us on Spotify. We put out these podcasts on a regular basis. They go on to Spotify same day, usually within a couple hours of the conclusion of our live podcast.
And TikTok, if plans work out, by Tuesday next week, you'll be front and center. We'll have a better image for you, and we'll have even better audio. So thanks for hanging in there with us. And the rest of you, we'll see you Tuesday next week at 8:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And as always, we really appreciate you joining us for these chats.
Oh, by all means, thank you guys again for the invitation, letting me be a part of this, and thank you all for the collaboration today.